Progress.
Okay, done.
Okay, welcome back. We are now going to class 6 of Brother Tio's class notes, Introduction to Buddhism with Abhidharma and Meditation. And in the previous class, class 5, we ended up with a discussion of anicca, dukkha, and anattā. And we're going to continue with that discussion, going through anicca, dukkha, anattā. Okay, so let's look at Dhammapada verse 227. Sabbe sankhara anicca, all conditioned things are impermanent. Sabbe means all. Sankhara means conditioned formations, things like mental and physical phenomena that arise due to causes. Anicca means impermanent, unstable, inconstant. Like, in essence, anything that arises due to conditions cannot last. It changes, it fades, and it disappears. So when we say sabbe sankhara anicca, it doesn't mean just everything changes, but more deeply, there is nothing that stays long enough to be owned or clung to. So what we can take from this, this too will pass, not just as a comfort for problems, but as a direct perception. So Vipassana yogis understand that clinging to something is absurd. It's like trying to grasp the breeze with your hand. It just doesn't make any sense. You can't do it. And so when you suffer, you should pause and ask yourself, what am I trying to hold on to that is already gone? Because often suffering is because of clinging to something that is already gone. As I mentioned, like trying to grab hold of the wind with your hand. It's just not possible. The next part of that verse is sabbe sankhara dukkha, or all conditioned things are suffering. Again, sabbe is all, sankhara, conditioned formations. That's anything that's built up by causes, like the body, feelings, thoughts, intentions, perceptions, everything falls under sankhara here. Dukkha means unsatisfactory, incapable of creating lasting peace, vulnerable to distress, decay, disappointment. So this phrase actually says anything that is conditioned, it's ultimately unsatisfactory, even the good stuff. So what we can take from this is whatever is clung to, whatever you cling to, cannot truly satisfy, cannot be satisfying. So every sankhara is unreliable. And therefore, because it's unreliable, it's a source of stress. It has intrinsic instability. It doesn't last. It's oppressed by change. It turns against your hopes. In other words, whatever you hope for, it's going to change. It's unable to satisfy. So no sankhara can bring lasting peace. So to the Vipassana yogi, every formation we experience is like a leaky boat. You try to rest in it, but it can't hold you. Water just keeps coming in. And the mind slowly realizes there's no safety in any sankhara. This isn't pessimism. This is wisdom, seeing things as they really are, not as we wish them to be. Even the most exquisite mental state, like even the most powerful, wholesome jhana, is dukkha in this sense, because it depends on causes and eventually ends. So even pleasant feeling is dukkha. The next part of this Dhammapada verse, sabbe dhamma anattā, all dhammas are non-self. So the structure of sabbe sankhara anicca, sabbe sankhara dukkha is changed slightly because with this last part, sabbe dhamma anattā, We're no longer talking about sankhara, we're talking about dhammas. That's all phenomena, both conditioned and unconditioned. Unconditioned phenomena includes nibbana. So anattā, it means not me, not mine, not a soul, no essence, no control. So this goes even further than impermanence and suffering. Not only is everything changing and unsatisfactory, there's no one behind it, no owner, no core self to be found. And what we take from this is that there is no one here to cling, to suffer, or control. All right, as an analogy, imagine a puppet show. In the puppet show, there's drama, thoughts arising, emotions dancing around, pleasure comes, pain follows. But behind the curtain, there's no puppeteer. You lift the curtain and expecting to see some self pulling the strings, but what you find is just strings, mechanisms, patterns, conditions. That's the realization in deep vipassanā. This is just dhammas rolling on. There is thinking, but there's no thinker. There is pain, but no sufferer. So this process is happening, but there is no abiding owner or entity in any of it. There is nothing behind it. It's like a mirror that reflects everything, but has no image of its own. The mind reflects dhammas without ever being a dhamma. All right, we're going to now switch and expand on this idea of impermanence and unsatisfactoriness and non-self, anicca, dukkha, anattā, by diving more deeply into these two words, conditioned phenomena. And in the Sankhata Lakkhana Sutta, Sankhata means things that change, Lakkhana means characteristic, Sutta. The Buddha describes the characteristics of conditioned phenomena as arising, they come into existence due to conditions, they pass away, they cease when conditions are no longer present, and they change while persisting. So even while they persist, they're subject to alteration. They're always changing. The arising is apparent. Conditioned things come into being when the right causes come together. Whether it's a sound, a thought, a sensation, or a feeling, it arises dependent upon conditions. In meditation, we begin to notice nothing just is. Everything begins somewhere. For example, and this is a very simplistic example, a pain arises in the knee. It wasn't there before. Now it is. Why? Well, conditions shifted. The second part of passing away, the passing away is apparent. What has arisen must pass. No conditioned phenomena is permanent. Its dissolution is built in. Through mindfulness, the yogi begins to observe vanishing just as clearly as arising. For example, a thought that seemed intense just a moment ago is now completely gone. The third aspect, change while persisting. Even while something seems to remain, it is subtly changing. It's not static. Even in its duration, it's modifying, aging, evolving. For example, the breath, it seems stable, but closer attention reveals its texture shifts, its quality fluctuates, its energy modulates. It's always changing and fluctuating and adapting. So everything, every experience, all conditioned phenomena arise, they pass away, they change while persisting. Now, in the Abhidhamma, we break everything down. We're focusing on conditioned phenomena and concepts or designations. Conditioned phenomena include the mind, that's citta and cetasikas, and that they are all formed, dependent, and impermanent. That includes the internal rupa of the body, the external rupa, which are sense objects, and nama, which are mental formations like feeling, perception, volition, attention, and so on, all the different cetasikas. those conditioning phenomena all have that characteristic of arising, passing away, and change while persisting. So this is conditioned phenomena. Unconditioned phenomena, something that's not conditioned, it only refers to one thing, nibbana. It's not made, it's not compounded, it's not built up. It's timeless, it's unchanging, it's peaceful. It doesn't arise, so it cannot perish. It is known by direct realization, not conceptually. Outside of that are concepts and designations. They don't fit time into the dichotomy or the splitting into conditioned and unconditioned. Time, space, words, and ideas, they're all concepts, not ultimate realities, the Paramattha Dhamma. They're neither conditioned in themselves nor unconditioned. Rather, they're designations based on the interplay of conditioned dhammas. Like time, that is inferred from change. Time is inferred from change because we perceive time only when we notice one state becoming another, like a leaf turning brown or a sound falling away. Without change, the idea of before and after disappears, and time loses its meaning. Space is inferred from form. Space is inferred from form because we only speak of space when there are forms that occupy or relate to it, like how distance is known by observing one object relative to another. Without form, here and there have no reference. Words and ideas are mentally constructed to communicate or make sense of experience. Concepts, they're like the map. They're not the territory. Ultimate reality is the territory. Concepts are just like a map. Concepts serve as tools, but they don't have an intrinsic reality in vipassanā meditation. So quickly, any questions on what I've just covered so far? Is my audio okay? Hello, is my audio okay?
Good, but another one. Yeah.
Okay. All right, so I'll continue on. Here we have in this diagram the Abhidhamma model for the mind, a bunch of chittas or mental states arising and falling away in sequence. Each of these chittas include consciousness and a bunch of mental factors. And they begin, they exist, and then they fall away, represented by the shape of the circle. And the falling away of one citta is the condition for the arising of the subsequent citta. So you never have two chittas arising at the same time. They arise in sequence. They have three phases, as we have mentioned before. During the arising phase, the first part, they come into existence. Each citta comes into existence. Each experience comes into existence. All conditioned phenomena come into existence due to conditions. Next, they change while persisting. So even while they persist, even in that strong, most intense, most stable aspect of the experience, there are subtle changes as it moves towards dissolution. And finally, they pass away. They cease when conditions are no longer present. And so we see there's the three phases of arising, existing, and passing away in each of the mental states or each of the chittas. Here's an analogy. From a distance, you see a line on the wall. Looks like just like a dotted line. But then you notice there's something strange about this line. It seems to be moving or vibrating. when you get a little closer, make the effort to change your perspective and move closer to that line on the wall, you see that the line is actually a series of ants. When you see closely that the line isn't continuous, it is actually a series of ants, one following another. And when you move even closer, you see that each ant has a beginning part, a head. Each ant has a body, and each ant has a tail. So by changing your perspective, making the effort to move closer to that line on the wall, the understanding of what's really happening changes fundamentally. One gets a different perspective on that same line on the wall and recognize that it's a series of ants, each ant having a head, a body, and a tail. Similarly, the Vipassana yogi, as their concentration deepens because of continuous mindfulness, they move closer to the object. Their mind moves closer to the object, and there is the recognition that every object has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Now, I'm going to now go into a discussion of the insight knowledges using that beginning, middle, and end from the suttas. This is based on a discussion that was held last class. In the last class, it wasn't recorded, unfortunately, but there was a fairly long discussion of the different insight knowledges and what the yogi perceived at each level. And so here, because that was brought up in last class, I'm going to dive into a little bit deeper here, and I'm going to base this discussion on Bhante Sujiva's book, The Tree of Wisdom, The River of No Return. So in this book, Bhante Sujiva describes the experience of insight knowledges, referencing the arising, changing while persisting, and passing away characteristics of conditioned phenomena. Now, for more than 40 years, Venerable Sujiva has guided thousands of Vipassana yogis, and I'm one of them. So he has captured his wisdom. This is, I think, about the third or fourth version of his capturing of this wisdom, and it's an excellent book. But some meditation teachers feel that information on insight knowledges should not be made available to the general public or to people who haven't experienced them. That's because, due to the tricky nature of the mind, learning about these insight knowledges before gaining or acquiring personal meditation experience might cause you to anticipate results and slow your progress. Ironically, knowing about what could happen next actually slows you down. It's natural to want to know what level you've achieved and what will happen next in meditation, but it's very difficult to evaluate your own experience. You got to always be aware that no matter what you come to believe, your self-assessment may be incorrect. You may think you've achieved some insight knowledge or a jhana, but you're probably wrong. Always remember that the mind likes to play tricks. Now, I can attest to this based on my own personal experience. If you cling to something and want it to happen, the mind may subconsciously try to mimic the experience. And without a teacher, you may not be able to tell the difference between the illusion and the real thing. Now, to avoid the trap of self-deception, because you're always going to be trying to fool yourself, it's important to use the information that I'm going to share here intelligently with continuous self-examination, scrupulous honesty, and actually with the guidance of a teacher, best with the guidance of a teacher. All right, when you sit down, when you start meditating, you're working with concepts. And this applies to all yogis, even experienced yogis. Concepts are not, or concepts or labels. Concepts are not conditioned phenomena. So they're not momentary. They don't have the characteristics of arising, changing while persisting, or passing away. So when you start meditating, you take a concept like rising or falling as an object, and this concept's a label. So as an analogy, imagine that you take a leaf from a tree. Using your bare eyes, you can describe the leaf's size, shape, color. These are all concepts. If you don't have a microscope, your perspective is limited to concepts. But if you put that leaf under a microscope, you're looking at the same leaf, but you get a new perspective. You gain a new way of looking at it. And as the power of the microscope increases, new perspectives naturally appear. So in this analogy, the power of the microscope, it's the power of concentration coming up, arising due to continuous mindfulness. Now, there are two types of concepts: the distracted thoughts of the wandering mind and concepts related to the object of meditation. All yogis experience distracted thoughts of the wandering mind, especially at the beginning of the retreat. The mind usually needs a few days to settle and clear out the garbage of daily life. I was asked how long, why 10-day retreats in the class, and I explained for the first 2 or 3 days, the mind is just clearing out the garbage of concepts that have just accumulated. And the last 2 or 3 days, you're building up new concepts because the mind knows it's getting ready to go home or leave the retreat rather than, and so hopefully there are a few days in the middle of a 10-day retreat where you're not overwhelmed with these distracted thoughts of a wandering mind, and you can start to dive deeply and deepen your experience. Now, so how do you deal with these distracted thoughts? The first strategy in dealing with these concepts of distracted thoughts, you first acknowledge them and recognize them. In other words, you can be mindful that the mind is distracted and wandering. Turn them into an object of meditation. All right, note, planning, note, label what's happening as thinking without going into the content of the thought. If keeping this level of detachment is difficult, get a little bit deeper and use words like labels like planning or remembering. But don't engage with what is being thought about, what is being planned, or what's being remembered. You just keep practicing non-attachment by letting the thought pass. Don't cling to it, don't push it away, just simply let it be, watch it dissolve. You stay balanced and equanimous. Whether the thought is pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, just remember the impermanent nature of all experiences. This thought is going to pass. Dealing with thoughts, not as obstacles, but as like opportunities for growth in your meditation practice. They allow you to develop patience and understanding about the nature of your mind. All right, now let's switch to concepts related to the object of meditation. This is like the rising and the concept of rising, the concept of falling, the concept of in-breath, out-breath, the concept of long breath, the concept of short breath. These are concepts related to the object of meditation. Now, when the yogi first sits down to meditate, the mind starts by working with concepts related to the object of meditation. This is natural, even for the most experienced yogi, because the mind is used to working with concepts. We start with conceptual labels because that's what we're familiar with. We have to start with something familiar before progressing to new experiences. So, like during sitting meditation, the yogi uses conceptual labels such as rising, falling, in-breath, out-breath, long, short, up, down. During walking meditation, the yogi uses conceptual labels such as lifting and pushing and dropping. During daily activities such as opening a door, the yogi uses labels such as reaching and touching. And during an interview, the yogi who has experienced things at a conceptual level They describe the conceptual object's form, shape, or direction. That's how they tend to relate to the object. And the teacher knows that as long as the yogi is talking about the object's form, shape, or direction, the rising is there, the rising is going long, the falling is going short, or it's like a ball or a balloon. Still working with concepts. The yogi's still working with concepts. But those have a value. Those concepts have a value. Just like a picture frame draws the viewer's attention to the picture that it surrounds, these kinds of labels draw the yogi's attention to the ultimate reality being experienced within the concept. So yogis who have not previously experienced insight knowledges may continue to know concepts for weeks or months of retreats before the first insight knowledges arise. But that's okay. Each moment of noting is a step forward on the path. It's part of the training. When starting a new retreat, yogis who have previously experienced insight knowledges can proceed to the first insight within a few days, perhaps a week. The mind of an experienced yogi knows instinctively how to descend from concepts down into the qualities of the underlying ultimate realities. The experienced yogi knows how to shift from looking at the leaf with their bare eyes to putting the leaf under the microscope of vipassanā meditation and looking at the structure. So when the mind is ready, subtle new perceptions of the object present themselves. It happens naturally. This understanding happens naturally as continuous mindfulness and concentration increases. So let's go to the first insight knowledge. As we can see from this diagram, the first insight knowledge focuses on the existing and changing aspect. This is the most stable aspect of each nama and rupa. As mindfulness starts to become continuous, concentration builds, concepts start to fall away. Concepts start to fall away, moments of ultimate reality, pixels of phenomena start to naturally appear. Like, for example, within the rising, there might be countless small experiences of pushing or pressure. That's the unique natural characteristic of the air rupa, an ultimate reality. Now, every distinct experience of pushing or pressure, it happens faster than the mind can think. With continuous mindfulness, the mind moves closer and closer to the object. As the mind moves closer to the concept, the underlying ultimate realities, they present themselves naturally. The ultimate realities are experienced and realized. They do not reveal themselves through analysis or thinking. So in one moment of noting, there's only one single nama or single rupa that's taken as the object. Just as the color or shape of something are inseparable, you can't take them apart, they can't be distinguished, the nama and the rupa of the experience, what is being experienced and what is doing the experiencing, can be separated, but they're inseparable, but they can be distinguished. So within the experience, there's always going to be many nama, many rupa, but only the most prominent one of them is going to be taken as the object. Now, in the next noting, billionth of a second later, another nama or rupa might be taken as the object. It's impossible to note everything at one time, but with continuous noting, looking at the same point of the in-breath, for example, the same pressing, the same movement, many, many times from different perspectives, you gain a complete perspective. And you get the big picture, a holistic view of what's really happening. Now, at this stage, the mind clearly and directly experiences that the mind that notes or observed is one thing, it's one quality or process, and the object that is being experienced, either nama or rupa, That's another thing. That's another quality or process. They arise together and pass away together in pairs. So the observer and the observed come together. The mind that notes and the object being noted are natural occurrences. Now, this is the first insight knowledge. The first insight knowledge is called the knowledge of discrimination into mind and matter. Now, in Pali, this is called nama rupa paracheda jnana. This is a purification of view, which means breaking through the concept of self by discriminating, differentiating, separating, or demarking mind and matter. Breaking the self into mind and matter is done through panya, understanding, not through thinking or analysis. Studying the Abhidhamma provides a theoretical framework for becoming familiar with the difference between nama and rupa, but insight knowledge is understanding without thinking or analysis. The first insight knowledge falls into an area outside of concepts. And so for a yogi without the theoretical structure or support, like of Abhidhamma, the rational mind can't really link to it. Without a very basic understanding of Abhidhamma, the yogi might close the door to insights. And that is why there's so much Abhidhamma included in Dhamma talks given by experienced meditation teachers. So as the mind starts to move beyond concepts, now during interviews, yogis often find it difficult to use words to describe their experience because words are mere concepts. An experienced teacher doesn't need many words to understand what the yogi is experiencing. In the first insight knowledge, the presence aspect, that middle part, the most stable part, is clear. The mind's not yet sharp enough to detect the arising and dissolution aspects of the object. Experiences are like flashes of lightning that arise too quickly to notice the beginning or ending. Think the last time you saw lightning. Did you notice the beginning of the lightning or the ending of the lightning? No. All you saw was the flash of lightning. It was just there, then it wasn't there. But actually, there is a beginning and an ending to the flash of lightning. Okay, I've gone through concepts and the first insight knowledge. Any questions on those two very important beginner aspects of meditation experience? Okay, took a bit of water. So just to make sure, everybody can hear me, right? The volume is okay and everything is clear?
Yes, you can, Brother Rock.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yes, yes.
Okay, the second insight knowledge. Now, if I go back, remembering the first insight knowledge, it is just the existence aspect that is clear. In the second insight knowledge, we can see that the yogi is now aware of the beginning and middle aspect of the object. It's called knowledge of conditionality, paccaya parigga jnana. And whereas in the first insight knowledge, experiences were like flashes that were too quickly to see clearly, the second insight knowledge is like overlapping flow of experiences. Like in the second insight, the yogi realizes the object's not static. So in the first insight knowledge, the quality of the ultimate reality was observed, like the pushing or the heat, the warmth. All it was observed as a instantaneous existence. In the second insight knowledge, the dynamic aspect of the quality is experienced. So rather than just the quality, the fact that the quality came into existence. So in the second insight, the yogi realizes that each object has a clear beginning. It starts. The arising sub-moment of the ultimate reality is dynamic, and therefore it's more difficult to experience than the presence phase, which is more stable. That's why you start with the stable presence phase, and you move to the dynamic aspect, saying that presence actually came into existence. So each experience of the air rupa, just to give you an example, I mean, the arising sub-moment was not noticeable before because it was too fast for the weaker mindfulness, momentary concentration to experience clearly. You went from concepts, deeper concentration through continuous mindfulness, deeper momentary concentration. I want to stress this. This is momentary concentration because the object is changing constantly. It's concentrating on each individual moment. Before there was the existence. Now it is the changing existence. So each experience of the air rupa, as an example, has a clear beginning. So that little pushing of the breath, you start with breath as the concept, the pushing of the breath as the first insight knowledge, and each pushing of the breath has a clear beginning that arises before presence. Before dissolution of the sub-moment of the current object can be detected, the next object arises. At this point, it's clear to the yogi that each object is new, even though it's the same type of object that you just finished noting. So it's pushing, 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 but each pushing is different, and each one is new and unique. During the second insight knowledge, the yogi recognizes that when conditions are present, the object arises. This cause-effect relationship between mental and physical phenomena starts to appear. This isn't because of thinking or analysis. The yogi just knows through direct experience that there is this arising of every object. So imagine that there's a sound or a vibration striking the ear. That sound is an example of a rupa. Now, there's also awareness of the sound. The mind that takes sound as its object is nama. So in the first insight knowledge, the yogi knows that the sound rupa is one thing, and the awareness of the sound nama is another. Now, in the second insight knowledge, the yogi discerns the arising of the awareness of the sound nama and knows that this awareness of sound arose because of the sound, rupa. So there's awareness because there is sound. They are conditionally linked. You can see that the conditional relationship between the sound and the mind that experiences the sound. So the yogi, you got to first discriminate between nama and rupa before knowing the conditioning relationship. So as another example, imagine that there's an intention, which is nama, to lift the foot during walking meditation. There is awareness of intention to lift the foot, but there's also the experience of the foot lifting, pressure, tension. That's rupa. So in the first insight knowledge, the yogi knows that there is intention, which is nama, is one thing. The experience of the lifting of the foot, which is rupa, is another thing. But in the second insight knowledge, there's awareness of the lifting of the foot, of the rupa. It arose because of the intention, or nama. So there is the intention to move the foot, and then there's the experience of the foot moving, and there is the deep understanding, without thinking or analysis, that, hey, the two are linked. One conditioned the other. Actually, in extreme cases, at the second insight knowledge, the yogi can trace back to past lives. It's not necessary to go back into that to get further insight knowledges, but there's awareness that the current life arose because of past life, ignorance, craving, and kama. So when one starts to explore all this conditionality of what causes what, some yogis actually start to experience, if I will, experience dependent origination, paticca-samuppada. All right, so any questions on that second insight knowledge of how the arising and sustaining aspects of every object lead to the conditionality, an understanding or an appreciation of conditionality? Any questions on this? Okay. the third insight knowledge. Now, third insight knowledge, you can see that the yogi not only experiences the arising, not only, so therefore coming into existence of each experience, the nature of each experience, the middle part, but now the mind is sharp enough, the magnifying glass of the microscope, the magnifying power of the microscope is sharp enough to truly experience the falling away. All right, so all aspects of the object are clear. So the third insight knowledge, it's called knowledge of comprehension of the three universal characteristics. In Pali, you call this samasana jnana. So in the third insight knowledge, the beginning, the middle, and the end of the object are clear. So whereas like the first insight knowledge or the concepts or first insight knowledge is like a flash, the second is overlapping experiences. Here, where the third insight knowledge is like a flow. Things are like a flow, not just overlapping, but a flow with waves and ripples. So this characteristic of having an arising, a presence, and dissolution, that is sankhata lakkhana, which means things that are conditioned. Now, as mentioned in that sutta that I just talked about, things that are conditioned have the characteristic of arising, presence, and dissolution. So this is at the third insight knowledge when the yogi truly experiences arising, existent, presence, and dissolution. And it is during this third insight knowledge that the yogi first experiences the dissolution of the object. Now, the characteristic of anicca is having arisen, it disappears. So to truly understand or to truly experience anicca, there has to be the experience or understanding of, hey, arising leads to dissolution. The yogi needs to experience dissolution. And so the characteristic of anicca is having arisen, it disappears. So anicca becomes apparent when we pay attention to the sankhata characteristic, the arising, existing, and falling and dissolution characteristic of the ultimate reality. This understanding of anicca, that leads to an understanding of the characteristic of dukkha. Because it is constantly disappearing, the ultimate reality is unsatisfactory or oppressing. Now, from one perspective, the ultimate reality appears as anicca. And from another perspective, the same ultimate reality appears as dukkha. Whatever is anicca is inherently dukkha. It's just got built in. It's two different perspectives on the same thing. Sense objects are not satisfying because they are continuously disappearing. Even pleasant feeling is unsatisfactory. It's because it's constantly disappearing. This is an existential experience, an experience related to existence. The yogi needs to surrender into the experience of dukkha and keep noting. And anattā is a third complementary perspective on the ultimate reality. Focusing on anicca, if you start with anicca, the yogi starts with anicca, then there is the recognition, the revelation, there's no permanent essence within the experience. On the other hand, if one starts with dukkha, that's when it is obvious that there's no control over the experience. The yogi's got no choice but to watch helplessly as the oppressive nature of the object is continuously experienced. It's constantly changing, and there's nothing you can do about it. So no permanent essence and no control, those are the two characteristics of non-self or anattā. So at this stage, the yogi has an understanding that all ultimate realities have the common characteristics of anicca, dukkha, anattā. Now, this is an experience this is an understanding rather based on experience, not based on thinking or analysis. And this is actually the true beginning of vipassanā jnana. everything leading up to this, all to this third insight knowledge, the yogi is doing preparatory work, just getting ready. It's at the third insight knowledge that an impermanence, unsatisfactory, non-self, anicca, dukkha, anattā is experienced. Like as an analogy, imagine a man that is walking using a cane, all right? The amount of ground that the cane touches is small compared to the areas where it doesn't make contact. Similarly, during this third insight, although the yogi generally discerns some arising and passing of phenomena, there's many gaps in attention. So even though there may be a split second where there is the third insight knowledge, truly understanding that the object being observed arises, exists, and dissolves, after that, I mean, a millionth of a second after that, the mind slips back into the concepts and more traditional way of thinking. Now, prior to this third insight knowledge, the yogi's working with concepts of anicca, dukkha, anattā. You read the suttas, you do the first insight, you do the, what you've experienced in your first and second insight knowledges. You're just working with concepts. But it's at the third insight knowledge that the yogi first experiences anicca, dukkha, anattā. And this is where true vipassanā starts. Now, I'm going to speed up the discussion as we go through the remaining insight knowledges. The fourth insight knowledge is called knowledge of arising and dissolution, or udabhaya jnana. In the fourth insight knowledge, the beginning and end aspect of the object is clear. So here, as one gets closer and closer to the object, what becomes clearer and clearer is not so much the nature of the object, like the pushing or the warmth or the sound. It is the change of it. It's not so much the existence of it, but the change of it that becomes so prominent. All right. So whereas in the third insight knowledge, it was like a flow with distinct waves and ripples, the fourth insight knowledge, it's like that flow breaks into splashes and drops. All phenomena are noticed to arise and pass away, flow quicker and quicker as mindfulness and concentration deeper. Finally, everything vanishes at its moment of arising. So there is just experience of arising and dissolution. What arose and what dissolved, the yogi can't even say. It doesn't register with the yogi anymore. So whether one is doing kaya-nupassana based on the body, vedana-nupassana based on feelings, chitta-nupassana based on the mind, or vedana-nupassana based on mental objects, it doesn't matter what the object is. In fact, the yogi can't even relate, can't even explain, or doesn't even experience what object it is. It's just arising, falling away, just constant arising, falling, everything vanishing at the moment of arising. We're here at the udabhaya jnana, at the fourth insight knowledge. It's just arising and falling away. The fifth insight knowledge and the next ones, they are knowledge of dissolution, or bhanga jnana. So in the fifth insight knowledge, it's only the end aspect, the dissolution, that's clear. The yogi experiences the constant, repeated dissolution of the object, which means they notice their characteristic of anicca, or disappearance, very clearly within every noting. Now, whereas the fourth insight knowledge, that was like a rapid flow breaking into splashes and drops, the fifth insight knowledge is like a flow that rushes into a void. At this stage, the perception of impermanence climaxes into the perception of dissolution. Everything is just dissolving. What it is, irrelevant. It's just dissolving. The yogi doesn't bother to notice. They're not able to notice the details about each formation. They only focus on the dissolution, the falling, the perishing, the disappearing, the vanishing. This, and then so this is the fifth insight knowledge. The sixth insight knowledge, that's the knowledge of terror. It becomes terrifying. This experience of everything just falling and falling and falling, dissolving, is terrifying. Like, as an analogy, if you see a building collapsing, you see the terror of it. I remember watching the Twin Towers collapse. There was a gut feeling of terror because it was falling apart. But you also see the constant collapse of phenomena as terrifying. It doesn't mean that they experience, the yogi doesn't experience that moment, but rather it sees the yogi sees into the conditions that can cause fear to arise. So it's when the mind is working at the concepts level that actual fear arises, because fear is a unwholesome mental state. Doesn't happen during the vipassana meditation. It doesn't happen at moments of vipassana meditation. But just like I mentioned earlier, the point of the cane is very small compared to all the ground covered. One sees in a brief instant the terrifying aspect of existence, and then the mind drops into concepts and experiences the terror that was conditioned by that experience. So the next few insight knowledges, they're all part of dukkha. They got knowledge of the danger of fault, knowledge of disenchantment, knowledge of desire for deliverance. Finally, when facing with this constant dissolution, the yogi experiences equanimity. When experiencing all this constant dissolution, that stage is called sankhara upekkha. This is the 11th insight knowledge. That is the knowledge of equanimity of formations. In other words, the yogi no longer experiences the terror of the experience of dissolution. So, okay, I got a little bit deeper than most of you have maybe experienced in vipassana, but since it came up during the last class and discussion, I thought I'd include it here and really just skim over the last parts of it. Any questions on the relationship between arising, existing, and dissolution, those three aspects of all conditioned phenomena, and insight knowledges? Any questions on this?
Brother Rob, Brother Chris here.
Yeah, Chris.
So, yeah, thanks for sharing, and it's wonderful. Now we can relate to the PowerPoint slides that you have sent. I'm kind of curious, at the later insight knowledge, why would disillusion and disenchantment come in before we reach the 11? Because I thought at that stage, they would have been able to separate feelings from anything that they see. Yeah, can you explain that?
Okay. Let's at the fifth insight knowledge, or let's say the sixth insight knowledge, the fifth or sixth insight knowledge. These are the lower dukkha knowledges, the lower knowledges of suffering. There is the constant experience of falling away. Whatever is experienced, it falls away, and it's like there's no foundation underneath you. The first gut, visceral reaction to that kind of experience is terror. That's the first gut reaction to that kind of experience. However, deeper, when there's more, you get more and more, terror is replaced by going, all right, I see how dangerous this is. This is a very dangerous, so it's not just terror. You're able to kind of like take a step back from it. The yogi takes a step back, the perspective takes a step back and is no longer just purely terrified, but recognizing that this is danger. This is what it is. This is dukkha. And then there's the disenchantment that, hey, I'm no longer under the illusion of permanence. Yes, I'm freed from this. Like disenchantment is the opposite of enchantment. Enchantment is you're under like a magical spell of believing in permanence. However, here, disenchantment, step back, there's still a recognition of suffering, this constant dissolution, but I'm no longer enchanted by this concept of permanence. Then the next stage, the mind matures to the point where it's knowledge and desire for deliverance, like, I want to get out of this. I got to get out of this situation. All right. It's still observing and recognizing it as dukkha, but now it is, I got to get out of it. Finally, the yogi goes, but there's actually one more stage in there where they see the anicca dukkha anattā at a much deeper level. That's the 10th insight knowledge. But then at the 11th insight knowledge, it's, all right, sankhara upekkha. Sankhara here means the dissolution, the constant dissolution. Upekkha means neutral feeling. There's no longer aversion. It no longer conditions aversion. It's just that, hey, that's the way it is. And it's necessary to get to that level of a experience of, hey, that's the way it is before one can move on. Otherwise, that aversion, whether the aversion is terror, whether it is seeing the disadvantage or the faults in it, whether it is being freed from the enchantment of continuousness, even further than I got to get away from this, which is still aversion, it becomes a stage of that's the way it is, the true acceptance of it. Then one can get ready for the experience of magga and phala, the experiencing nibbana. Nibbana cannot arise as an object while the mind is still focused on the negative aspect of sankhata, the existence of reality. Does that help, Brother Chris?
Yeah, it does, but I'm still kind of curious. When you reach to that stage, you have already quickly, but what you're saying is, even if you reach to that stage, feelings and disenchantment, clinging to something, why am I falling, still comes in. That's what you're saying.
Okay, let me put it this way. There is, just like when you saw a building falling down, there's the experience of the building, seeing the building falling down, and then there is, in another moment, that experience of terror of, oh, that's terrible.
Okay, Brother Rob, let me give an example that because the building, when you are seeing it, is different from being inside the building and falling. So you go to a roller coaster ride, right? So initially, when we go for the first roller coaster ride, definitely screaming, definitely worried. Am I going to survive this roller coaster ride? But as you go to more and more roller coaster ride, our goal as yogis reaching to insight knowledge and meditation is, oh, actually it's just a roller coaster ride. So whether it's ups and whether it's down, and everybody around me is screaming, that's fine. I think that's understandably, but I am not screaming because I know that I'll survive this roller coaster ride. To a certain extent, I may even open my eyes and look, oh, everybody is screaming, not discriminating them, but you understand that that's part of the experience, right? Dukkha, anattā, because also a bit of anicca, because there'll be ups and there'll be downs, there'll be anticipation, that there'll be a couple of seconds where you have some time to think, and then when the roller coaster falls, a couple of 100 feet down, you start to see, you start to worry, am I going to survive it? Now, so if you are experienced yogi, that roller coaster ride is definitely something that you wouldn't be disenchanted. You would definitely don't mind going through it over and over and over and over again, because you understand the concept of ups and downs, the concept that you will not die, and for that matter, nama rupa and all that thoughts comes in, right? So that can you use that to explain a roller coaster ride?
It is a superficial analogy, but yeah, it's a good analogy, but still very superficial compared to the true experience of.
All right.
But yes, it is a good analogy, and one can spend many hours basically experiencing these dukkhas. And okay, let's just talk about feeling for a moment. When there is a insight knowledge, as we know from Abhidhamma, it's either a pleasant feeling or a neutral feeling, right? No
Right.
negative feeling, cannot be unpleasant feeling.
Right.
So therefore, at all of these moments of insight, at most there is a neutral feeling. And if not a pleasant feeling, at the lower insights, there's a lot of pleasant feeling. At the higher insights, it's more neutral feeling. However, there's it's like observing for the moment the what is happening, the building falling down. However, there is a split second later when the mind is no longer having an insight knowledge, but shifts to an unwholesome state of mind, which has fear or aversion as its and so unpleasant mental feeling. So there is so much unpleasant mental feeling during the dukkha jnanas, not because of the jnana moments, but because of all the time that happens in between those dukkha jnanas. And those in between moments are unpleasant. However, when one reaches the sankhara upekkha jnana stage, there is no unpleasant feeling. And it's just a neutral type of feeling where it's neither attracted or repelled by the experience of this constant dissolution. And it's like you can sit down for a couple of hours, and after that come out of the meditation, and it's like, what happened? There was no change in feeling for 2 hours. It was constant. It was like constantly neutral feeling. And it's not something that one experience. Normally, one experiences constant pleasant and unpleasant and neutral feelings always changing. I mean, just imagine for a moment, you're sitting in a chair there. You're fidgeting because of unpleasant physical feelings, and the mind is constantly experiencing unpleasant feelings. Can you imagine for 2 hours of sitting and then realizing that there was not 1 millisecond of unpleasant, nor was there a millisecond of pleasant? There was just flat, neutral for 2 hours of sitting. It's an amazing experience. And this is where you're starting to get close to the sankhara upekkha jnana experience, where there's just no fluctuation whatsoever. There is just observing what there is, what the reality of what exists. But your analogy of the roller coaster, it's a good one. As you get more and more used to it, you become less it becomes less painful and less suffering as you become more and more used to it. But it's far deeper. The actual experience, very difficult to explain using words. That's why we use analogies like even for the first insight knowledge, so difficult to explain using words. But when you get to the higher insight knowledges, the yogi words are just completely inadequate, because there is concepts are so far behind this. Does that
Thanks,
help?
brother. It does. It brings me closer, not yet there, but to understanding what all this insight knowledge phases are. Thanks.
Okay, all right. So any other questions on these insight knowledges? Okay, this has been a fairly heavy class, full of, I mean, talking about all these insight knowledges. The next part of Brother Kyo's, I'll do one quick section here. So, let me just. Here we talk about study, pariyatti, practice, patipatti, and morality, and realization, pativeda. In the, do I do that now or next week? We're already kind of like 10 minutes over the time. So I tell you what, next class, we will go through, we'll start with the pariyatti, patipatti, pativeda, about the progression of practice from study to practice to realization. Okay, so we'll just end on that very heavy stuff, and we'll start with the pariyatti, patipatti, pativeda next class. Okay. So any other questions before? Oh, so I'll just go back to the insight knowledges. So before we close, any other questions on the insight knowledges? Okay. So if somebody could read the reflections, we'll stop the recording and
reflected. Let us recall to our mind this morning. We come to the temple with the sole purpose to study the Dharma. With good faith, Sada, and